So our focus now is on these words that we have heard that Kojo read for us earlier from Matthew's Gospel in chapter 5. These words, Jesus saying to us about needing to love our enemies. We find in verse 43 to 48 of Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5. These words that begin in verse 43 with Jesus saying, "You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy." Just as he begins the passage that whilst I was away, you looked at last week with Trudy regarding retaliation, begins with the same sort of phrase, "You have heard that it was said." Jesus is referring to what seems to be received wisdom by so many people out there in the world that he was addressing. We often interpret this, it would seem, as being, oh yeah, that's all about the Old Testament law, and he's having a go at the law that the people were observing, the people of Israel, that they were doing something wrong. And we can look to some, I'm not going to look at these in detail, but I'm going to give you some references in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, and in Deuteronomy 23, chapter 6. There's some little bits of evidence that suggest, that reinforce what Jesus is saying. One in Leviticus is about loving our neighbors, but in Deuteronomy and in other places too, we find these strands of kind of not exactly loving your enemies, but actually dealing with your enemies in quite a brutal way, often involving the sword, but in mistreating people in that way. That's what I thought when I approached this. But we have to remember that what Jesus has said nearby to this, and says on a number of occasions, is that he doesn't come to take away from the law. He doesn't come to change the law. Rather, Jesus comes to actually kind of reclaim what the law is about, what it was meant to be, what God's purpose is for his creation. So it doesn't make sense for him to attack and to undermine what was established as the way that people should behave. It seems that what Jesus is using here is hyperbolic language, is rhetoric, the language that people that do public speaking, like me, like to use kind of outrageous comments or to sort of big things up a bit in order to try and make a point. Could be that Jesus is doing that. But it could be more so that Jesus is summing up the general feeling of the established and acceptable way of being, not anything that's religious, not anything that it was about Judaism or any other faith, but just that that's basically a human default position of how we behave. That if somebody wrongs us, we hate them. If somebody hurts us, we don't like them. We find it hard to be nice to them. That person is dead to me, we hear people say. We no longer want to do business with somebody. And I would actually argue that Jesus, what he's doing here, is building on a strong theme that is there in the Old Testament of actually loving people that might be regarded as enemies. So again and again, in the Hebrew scriptures, which we call the Old Testament, then there's the command to welcome the alien, to welcome the stranger. People that might have been regarded as being people that weren't the obvious people to love. Or there's I think it's interesting bits like from Proverbs 25:21 says this: "When you come upon your enemy's ox or donkey going astray." There were donkeys yesterday in the park when we were at Litchfield, but this didn't happen, nor were those people with the donkeys my enemies at that point. "You shall bring it back. When you see the donkey of one who hates you lying under its burden, and you would hold back from setting it free, you must help to set it free." So that's Exodus 23:4-5. Elsewhere in Proverbs as well, I think you will find that. But the thing is that if you see somebody who might be considered to be your enemy, you see their beast of burden in trouble, struggling, some problem with their land or their situation, you wouldn't hold back in helping them. So Jesus is building on what is already there. Jesus is encouraging us to reclaim what it is to be godly people. So therefore, when Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, there's a continuity with lots of what the Old Testament is really about. But what Jesus is advocating is not the easy way of doing things. He is still, for us, in the way that we choose so often to deal with situations in life, he's turning those things on their head. He's turning the world upside down. And provides for us and for them, the people that were the first hearers of this, a big challenge, which raises questions for us, because it's opposed to the kind of thing that we have heard said in our families, in our workplaces, from our own lips, in our own heads. Those things when we wish that person that has wronged us to be dead, or something bad to happen to them, or simply we don't want to deal with them anymore. We don't want to be nice to them. We don't want to be kind to them. And some of the questions that it might raise for us are, who are my enemies? Who are our enemies? It might be, as I've already referred to, really, individuals, people who have hurt us along the way. It might just be people that irritate us, people that get on our nerves that we just find it really hard, try though we might, to show love towards. It might just be people that we don't get on with that well. It could be great groups of people. Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan to illustrate and to play upon those differences in the enmity that there was between the people of Israel and the people of Samaria, the Samaritans. And he has various encounters with people where that kind of clash of culture and of who should do business, good business with whom, these things, there's the friction that is there. So who are our Samaritans? Who are our enemies that we have in the world? What groups of people are the kind of people where our default position will be, and I hear people say this, and they might refer to certain groups of people, ethnic groups or types of people, and say they're dirty people, them. They're dirty people. They're lazy people. They're selfish people. Oh, they're good people. We make all these judgments about whole swathes of humankind, whole swathes of people made in our image. Or it might be about people that have oppressed us and persecuted us and continue to do so. It might be about the people who in the kind of groups of people in our workplace or in our lives who have bullied us. Those people who have victimized us. Those people that we avoid. In verses 46 and 47, Jesus says, well, if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? So he's speaking to his Jewish listeners. Then tax collectors would be dirty people, a part of the oppressive system, who you wouldn't really regard in a very positive way, and you wouldn't really want to have any kind of contact with. You shouldn't do under the law. And then for the Gentiles, so they would be all of the non-Jewish people, and again the same would apply. So Jesus is challenging them. But who fit into those categories for us? Who are the tax collectors, the Gentiles, the Samaritans, the people that we have a very low regard for, whether they be groups of people that we write off? Or sometimes we don't even know that we're doing it because we elevate certain groups and then by implication say that other groups are not so good. Or it might just be about individuals. Some wisdom on this that might help us, which has come from a world leader last week, President Donald Trump, who said that, I'm being a little bit ironic there, but President Trump, after his visit to Europe, his whirlwind visit to Europe last week, sowing confusion amongst world leaders, and probably confusing himself. But when he used this word foe, he talked about who America's foes are. Did anybody else hear that in the news? Yeah? And so when he's saying, he said, there were some of the usual suspects like Russia and China, but then that's quite confusing because he's clearly kind of best mates with Vladimir Putin at the moment. But then also said about the European Union being a foe of America. And he did that thing, didn't he, where he's kind of making it up as he goes along, maybe, and kind of offering it in a slightly, questioning kind of a way. But it raises this question of who our enemies might be. And sometimes it's hard for us to think, well, actually, who are our enemies? Don't do this now, because I want you to please listen to what I'm saying. But when you get home or some other time, make a list of who your enemies are. Don't let anybody else see it, okay? And don't give it to an assassin or anything to be your hit list, but make a list of the people that might be your foes, the people that might be your enemies, the people that have wronged you, the people that have hurt you, the people where if you met them or you walked into a room and they were there, you'd have to kind of do some serious thinking about how you're going to deal with this. Make a list of those people and then do something with it. Pray over it. Pray for those people. Pray for yourself in how you deal with those people and do something about it. So that's our enemies. Then I want us to think about the love thing. How do we love our enemies? What does that mean when Jesus says love your enemies? Okay? So we haven't really concluded who our enemies are, but I want us to think about who our enemies are. I can't tell you who your enemies are. But we need to think about that, who it is that we're focusing on with this. But what about the love thing? How does that work? When Jesus talks about love here, again, I'm sorry, if you've been around church for a long time, then you've heard this lots of times, but the love thing that's been talked about here is not fluffy, romantic love, okay? That's the Greek word, eros. It's not philos, which is about a kind of like a brotherly love, friendship kind of thing. It's this thing, agape. Agape. So when Jesus is saying this, he's saying, it's kind of, agape your enemies, okay? If that probably doesn't really help. We don't know what agape means. But agape is about us showing goodwill and friendship towards people. It's about showing some kind of practical, I nearly said love, but some practical way of being that is positive around people, cooperating with each other. So let's maybe use the word goodwill. So it's also not about thinking about as we love our enemies, about kind of just say, oh, bless them. But we might use this as a phrase, especially as Christians, just to kind of almost dismiss them in that way and belittle them some way. Agape is about a level playing field kind of a love. That is a free-flowing, dual direction thing. And so how we show this thing, which is not a fluffy romantic thing. So when you've done your list of your enemies, what I'm not expecting you to do, but do this if it works for you and it works for them, is to go out and buy them all flowers and rush up to them and kiss them and hug them next time you see them. That might not work. Okay, that's not necessarily the kind of expression of love that Jesus is talking about here with agape. It's also not necessarily the kind of love that is about whipping people with love. So, in Proverbs and then in Romans chapter 12, Paul talks about us loving people in such a way, kind of burying them with kindness so that they have no choice but to respond positively. Yeah, it ends up being about heaping burning coals on their head because you're so kind to them. So they don't know how to deal with it. Some people interpret this passage as being about that's what Jesus is doing. He's showing that you can be quite cunning about it. That if you show love to people, that then, you're kind of shaming them. Well, it might be that. It might be about us, but it seems a bit of a strange thing to love somebody in order to embarrass them and shame them. That being the reason why we do it. I think what Jesus is talking about here is about just loving people for love's sake. Loving people for God's sake. To simply show love, because that is, we pray, don't we, about God forgiving us as we forgive others. that we need to treat others as we would be treated ourselves, as we have been treated and are treated by God. So simply to express that in that way. I've shared before about, and I know one of my neighbours is here in the sanctuary today. It's not that neighbour, but she knows who I'm talking about. We live on a close, and there's one set of neighbours who moved in a few years ago now, and they're not exactly fitted in with the culture of the close. They've not always been that friendly, and they've been a bit negative and angry towards me and Isabel and some other people too. I don't think it's not just us, is it? No. Okay, that's all right then. And it's been quite a challenge to love them. I hesitate, I wouldn't call them enemies, but I find them quite hard, really quite hard to deal with. And we've had some situations I've mentioned before where, things are in the wrong place. They don't like how we conduct our household and so on. Nothing major, but just all those niggles that go on all the time. And we've prayed about it. And we've worked at trying to actually just kind of diffuse that. And just trying to carry on showing love rather than think, right then, that's it then, I'm going to stick the wheelie bin there or whatever it might be, or I'm going to throw this over the fence. That wasn't what we were doing anyway. But, that's one response. I'll show them. So we've deliberately tried not to do that. And that's bit by bit helped. And just always to be pleasant and to take that initiative whenever we've seen them. I'm not sharing this to show how wonderful we are, because it's been a struggle. And then something happened when we had one of the many lots of snow. Do you remember snow? In the springtime, I think this was. Anyway, and I helped them. I could see them because they're quite senior in age, and they were struggling to clear their drive with the snow. So I just went out and helped to clear the snow. And it wasn't just the snow that melted. It's just changed things immensely since then. I didn't go out there thinking, this is my moment. I'll go out there and clear the snow, because then that will really challenge them and then they'll have to like me. I went out there because I thought that I needed to do that, because I felt sorry for the fact that they were kind of struggling to clear all this snow and ice. And it's worked. And now he used to avoid eye contact if ever I saw him anywhere. He initiates conversations. And then she told me about a trip that they'd had to go up to Northumberland, and they'd met the man who used to be the Methodist minister here in Erdington. I had a conversation about all of that. So, thank you, God, because it makes life so much easier. But my point is this, that I didn't do it in order to shame them. Did it because that's what we are called to do. And I'm not saying they are my enemies, but they were people that we weren't getting along with, and it was hard to know how to love and how to deal with them. And so we just did what we felt we are supposed to do, because that's following the way of Jesus. To say, not offering it to show just how brilliant and wonderful we are, but actually just that it was a real struggle, and we were trying to be faithful to doing what we were supposed to do. And here is Jesus urging us to love for love's sake. To treat people and regard people like God treats and regards us. In verse 45, he says, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. When it says about this, be sons of, what this means when Jesus says this, he refers to James and John as being the sons of thunder. So it doesn't mean that their father was called Thunder, not as far as I know anyway, but more that they reflected thunder in the way that they behaved, okay? So I might be son of, disappointment or something for me. I don't know what I would be. Son of baldness, I suppose. But sons of God, for us sons of the Father, would mean that we reflect who he is. We show those qualities in our life. We reflect those in our lives. So therefore, if this is who we are and what we are supposed to do, we need to do it. We need to pray for those people who really get on our nerves. We need to pray for those people that have really hurt us and continue to do so. We need to pray for those people who are big groups of people who we write off because we maybe had a bad experience with one person, or because we're just told in our own culture that those people are bad and not the same as us, or are just different in some way, or we believe what we read in the newspapers about them. We need to act kindly. We need to forgive. We need to forgive as our trespasses have been forgiven. We maybe need to even tolerate, but we need to do more than tolerate. We need to be more active with it. Our dog, Maud, the greyhound, she has enemies. They're called, I'm sorry about this, cat lovers, they're cats, okay? So Maud is always on a lead, and they're the enemy. So, and the cats outside our house kind of taunt her, the fact that they're not on a lead. They're in her garden, they're on the close, and it's an action-packed place we live, you see. All these things going on. And she says that they're her enemy. And the other day, we were going out for a walk, and normally, if I sat outside the door, and then if she's on the lead, if she sees a cat, it's like that. She wants to go for it, or her ears go up. It's a bit half-hearted, actually, to be honest with you. I think she can't be bothered. Don't know, she hasn't thought through what would happen if she actually reached the cat. And but then last week, there was one time when we were walking out, and there was a cat just lounging on the pavement just across the road. So, and she just kind of looked at it and then thought about it and then carried on walking on. And I said, oh, well done, Maud. Well done. That's really good. Ridiculous. Because she wasn't thinking anything like that. I don't know. She just wasn't feeling it at that time. But I interpreted it that she was tolerating. She was showing tolerance and self-control. Well, that's nonsense, isn't it? It's nonsense. She's a dog. Okay? But that's how it is. So it's a simple level. And that doesn't really work. That's not her loving her enemies. That's just, I don't know. It just didn't happen though. She wasn't feeling it on that day. Next time she'd probably just try and get the cat completely. So that's not enough. That's dogs, cats, whoever. For us as human beings made in God's image, we need to reflect Him and who He is and have that kind of ability to forgive and that ability to love and to do that again and again, no matter how much we have been hurt, no matter how much we are hurting about something. To keep showing that goodwill. To have it with humility running through. So what we need to be, in order to practice this loving of enemies, is to be practical about it. To actually help in some way. To show some kind of practical action. To have some humility with that. By which I mean, we need to be big, as in big-hearted, as people of God. But we also need to be really small at the same time. As in not big-headed and not think that we're fantastic in what we're doing or better than them. And we need to rely on God. And the more that we do that, the more that we rely on the power of the Holy Spirit working in us and the inspiration of these words from Jesus and other things that we see and know about Jesus, the more that we receive that healing and the more that we feel at peace at ourselves and the more that we feel at peace with ourselves, the more that we are able to be at peace with other people. We act and the change will follow. And as children of God, we need to work towards that completion, that perfection that Jesus refers to in verse 48. We need to keep working at it, simply because we are called to do so. Amen.